In 1791, a Shawnee warrior killed 3 American soldiers at the Battle of the Wabash using nothing but a stone-headed war club. The soldiers had rifles. He won, anyway. That's because primitive weapons weren't crude. They were engineered over thousands of years, and most modern Americans have no idea how effective they actually were. Number 14 on this list could punch through colonial armor from 60 yards away. Number 7 was so feared by British regulars, they begged commanders for permission to retreat when they saw it on the battlefield. And number 3 was declared illegal in 3 states because it killed too efficiently. These weapons built this country before firearms ever reached its shores, and the skills to use them took a lifetime to master. Hit that subscribe button before we begin, because what you are about to see rewrites everything you thought you knew about early American combat. Let's count them down. Number 25, the rabbit stick. Long before firearms reached North America, the rabbit stick was the first weapon a Hopi or Apache boy learned to throw. Carved from hardwood, usually oak or mesquite, it measured about 18 inches, with a curved, flattened profile that looked almost like a boomerang but never returned. A skilled thrower could drop a jackrabbit at 30 yards, spinning the stick horizontally so it swept through a wide arc and connected with the animal's legs. In dry southwestern washes, archaeologists have pulled rabbit sticks from sites over 3,000 years old, their edges still sharp enough to snap bone. Children practiced daily, competing to knock dried gourds off fence posts. By adulthood, a good hunter could feed a family through winter using nothing but this curved piece of wood. The weapon demanded no arrows, no bowstring, no metal, just patience, practice, and a throwing arm built over a lifetime. Argentine gauchos get all the credit, but indigenous peoples across the American plains used bola-style weapons for thousands of years before Spanish contact. 3 stones, each about the size of a fist, were wrapped in rawhide and tied to leather cords about 3 feet long. A hunter gripped the knot where the cords met, swung the weapon in a whirling circle over his head, then released it toward a running animal's legs. The cords wrapped tight on impact, bringing down bison, deer, or even rhea-like birds. Mastery took years. A bad throw could bring the stones back into the hunter's own face. But in expert hands, bolas could immobilize prey at 50 feet without damaging the hide, which was critical when every scrap of leather meant survival through a Great Plains winter. Spanish conquistadors wrote astonished letters describing the weapon's accuracy. Number 23, the sling. David and Goliath was not fiction. Native Americans across the continent used slings made of braided yucca fiber or twisted sinew to hunt small game and defend villages. A leather pouch sat in the middle of 2 cords, cradling a smooth river stone about the size of a walnut. The slinger whirled it overhead, released 1 cord, and sent the stone flying at speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour. At that velocity, a well-placed stone could kill a man at 80 yards. The Inca devastated Spanish armored columns with slings in South America, and Aztec warriors broke cavalry charges the same way. In North America, Pueblo children learned slinging before they could read tracks, guarding cornfields from ravens and rabbits. A pouch full of stones weighed almost nothing and cost nothing to replace. Number 22, stone knives. Before steel reached American shores, every man, woman, and child carried a knife chipped from flint, chert, or obsidian. Master knappers in the Southwest and Great Lakes region could produce blades thinner than modern surgical scalpels, some measuring only 2 millimeters thick, yet sharp enough to split a deer hide along the belly without nicking the meat. The technique, called pressure flaking, used a deer antler tine to chip tiny flakes from the edge, creating a serrated cutting surface, and it cut faster than steel. A stone knife blade could be produced in 20 minutes by a skilled craftsman. When it dulled, you did not sharpen it, you napped a new edge. Modern surgeons have actually tested obsidian scalpels and found they create cleaner wounds with less scarring than steel. Your ancestors were not using inferior tools, they were using better ones. Number 21, the fishing harpoon. Salmon fishing along the Pacific Northwest coast demanded a weapon far more sophisticated than a sharpened stick. Tlingit, Haida, and Kwakiutl fishermen built composite harpoons with detachable bone heads lashed to long cedar shafts with spruce root cord. The heads separated on impact, staying embedded in the fish while the shaft floated free to be retrieved. A line connected the head to the fisherman's wrist. Salmon ran so thick in fall-spawning rivers that a skilled harpooner could spear 50 fish in a morning, enough to feed a family through the entire winter once smoked. The weapon required perfect timing. Refraction distorts a fish's apparent location underwater, so harpooners learned to aim below what they saw. Children practiced on floating pine cones for years before earning a real harpoon of their own. Number 20, the blowgun. Cherokee hunters in the southern Appalachians used blowguns to hunt squirrels, rabbits, and birds for centuries before European contact. The tube itself was made from river cane, carefully hollowed out and straightened with fire and oil until it ran true for 7 feet. Darts measured about 10 inches, fletched with thistledown, and tipped with a hardened point. A hunter could exhale a dart with enough force to kill a squirrel at 50 feet, completely silent, never alerting other game in the area. Modern Cherokee blowgun competitions still draw competitors who can group darts inside a quarter at 20 yards. The weapon made no smoke, no flash, no sound. It was the original suppressed weapon. When one animal fell, the rest kept eating, and the hunter took them one by one until his quiver was empty. Number 19, the fire arrow. First pattern break. This is where it gets interesting. Fire arrows were not a Hollywood invention. Native warriors wrapped pitch-soaked moss or cattail fluff around specialized arrowheads, lit them in a signal fire, and launched them in high arcs toward enemy villages. The tactic was devastating against the wooden palisades and thatched roofs of early colonial settlements. In 1675, during King Philip's War, Wampanoag warriors burned 17 English towns to the ground using fire arrows in coordinated night attacks. Here is what military historians rediscovered in 2008. Wet rawhide stretched over arrow shafts created a slow-burning fuse that could ignite roofs even after the arrow embedded. The British War Office classified this as savage warfare and banned their own troops from using the tactic, yet it had been standard practice in Europe 200 years earlier. The English had simply forgotten, and Native Americans had not. Number 18, the Atlatl. The Atlatl was America's first mechanical advantage weapon, predating the bow by at least 15,000 years. It consisted of a wooden shaft about 2 feet long with a hook or cup at one end that cradled the butt of a dart. The thrower held the Atlatl in his palm, loaded the dart, and whipped his arm forward. The lever action effectively extended his arm, doubling the velocity of the throw. A well-thrown dart from an atlatl could pierce a bison from 40 yards, and Clovis hunters used them to kill mammoths and mastodons across the continent. Modern archaeological experiments have measured atlatl darts punching through 4 inches of flesh and bone at ranges where a modern baseball pitcher could not even throw a rock. When Cortez landed in Mexico, Aztec warriors pierced Spanish steel breastplates with atlatls. The eastern woodland tribes crafted self-bows from a single stave of hickory, Osage orange, or black locust, measuring 5 to 6 feet long. The wood was split from a living tree, seasoned for a full year, then shaved and tillered until each limb bent identically. A finished bow pulled between 50 and 70 pounds, sending a cedar arrow tipped with a flint or antler point through a deer at 30 yards. Colonial militia documented Iroquois warriors shooting 3 arrows into the air before the first one landed, each arrow finding its mark. The bow required no powder, no shot, and no maintenance beyond unstringing it when not in use. A warrior could fire 12 aimed shots per minute, a rate that American soldiers would not match until the Civil War. Every feature of the English longbow had an American equivalent. Number 16, the composite bow. On the Great Plains, wood suitable for self-bows was scarce, so Comanche, Cheyenne, and Sioux craftsmen built composite bows from layered materials. A core of ash or mulberry was backed with sinew and belted with horn from mountain sheep or bison, all glued together with boiled hide cement. The finished bow measured only 3 feet long, short enough to fire from horseback at full gallop. Yet it pulled harder than bows twice its length. A mounted Comanche warrior could fire 20 arrows per minute, circling an enemy and shooting from under his horse's neck. When the United States cavalry first encountered Comanche archers in the 1830s, officers reported that their single-shot rifles were useless. By the time a trooper reloaded, he had taken 6 arrows. The composite bow dominated the plains for 200 years and made the Comanche the most feared light cavalry on the continent. Number 15, the stone spear. Long before bows, the spear was the universal weapon of the Americas. Thrust in close combat or hurled at running game, spears came in every size and weight. The shaft was usually ash or hickory, 6 to 8 feet long, tipped with a lanceolate stone point, lashed with rawhide and sinew. Paleo-Indian Clovis points, dating back 13,000 years, have been found embedded in the bones of mammoths across the American West. The craftsmanship of these points astounds modern flint knappers. Each one required hours of precise pressure, flaking to produce the characteristic fluted base that allowed it to socket cleanly into a split shaft. A spear in skilled hands could be thrown 60 feet with enough force to pass through a deer entirely. It was the weapon that fed the continent for 15,000 years before the bow arrived. Obsidian is volcanic glass, and when knapped correctly, it produces the sharpest cutting edge known to humanity. Molecular edges, measuring 3 nanometers thick, have been documented on obsidian blades compared to around 300 nanometers on the finest steel razor. Aztec priests used obsidian daggers to perform sacrifices, cutting through the chest wall in a single stroke. In North America, Shasta and Modoc warriors along the Pacific carried obsidian knives that could sever a man's hand at the wrist with a single blow. The blades were brittle. A hard impact against bone could shatter them, but for cutting flesh and hide, nothing in the colonial arsenal matched obsidian's performance. Modern heart surgeons still use obsidian scalpels for delicate procedures because the cuts heal faster and leave less scar tissue. American warriors had been wielding surgical-grade blades for 10,000 years. Number 13, the ball-headed war club. Eastern woodland warriors carried ball-headed war clubs into every major battle of the colonial period. The club was carved from a single piece of ironwood or maple, including the knob, which was shaped from the dense root ball of the tree. The striking head weighed 2 to 3 pounds, and the handle extended 24 to 30 inches, sometimes wrapped with leather or decorated with tufts of hair. In close combat, a single downward strike could crush a man's skull through a tricorn hat. British officers reported finding their dragoons with heads split entirely in half after engagements with Huron and Algonquin warriors. The weapon required no ammunition and never jammed. It was silent, deadly, and available at arm's length every second of every day. Ball-headed clubs remained in active use well into the 19th century. Number 12, the Gunstock War Club. Second pattern break. The story here is wild. After contact with Europeans, native warriors noticed the shape of a musket's wooden stock and adapted it into a new style of war club. The Gunstock War Club looked exactly like a rifle stock, with a curved hardwood shaft about 2.5 feet long. Mounted in the crook of the curve was a spike of iron, bone, or sharpened flint, protruding like a bayonet. The design was genius. Warriors who had already mastered the angle of the musket could wield the club with immediate skill, and the spike caught on ribs and shoulder joints, pulling out rather than glancing off. Lewis and Clark's expedition journals describe Lakota warriors carrying gunstock clubs alongside their actual rifles, and they preferred the club in close fighting because it never misfired. The adaptation took a European symbol of firepower and turned it into a purely hand-to-hand killing tool. Number 11, the Jawbone Club. Plains tribes harvested the jawbones of bison and used them as striking weapons and as hafts for composite clubs. The bone was already curved, already weighted at the business end, and already serrated with molars that tore flesh on contact. A warrior could fasten a stone or iron blade to the jaw with rawhide and create a weapon that looked almost like a curved sword. In Cheyenne oral histories, jawbone clubs carried a spiritual power beyond their physical effectiveness. The bison had given its life to feed the people, and now its jaw returned to protect them. Bison were so numerous on the plains that a new jawbone club could be made after every hunt. When the herds were destroyed by American market hunters in the 1870s, the weapon disappeared within a decade. Its absence marked the end of an entire way of war. Number 10, the flint tomahawk. The original tomahawk was not iron, it was stone. A grooved stone head, shaped over weeks of pecking and grinding, was lashed to a bent wooden handle with rawhide that shrank tight as it dried. The result was a weapon about 14 inches long, weighing 2 pounds, with a cutting edge that could split wood, cleave meat, or crack skulls. Flint tomahawks have been found at Mississippian mound sites dating to 1200 AD, suggesting the design is nearly 1,000 years old on American soil. The weapon served as both tool and weapon, chopping firewood in the morning and defending the village at dusk. A hunter never left the longhouse without one at his belt. When iron tomahawks arrived with European traders, the stone versions did not vanish. They remained in use for ceremonial purposes for another 200 years and in remote villages far beyond that. Number 9. The iron tomahawk. When French and English traders brought iron tomahawk heads to North America in the 1600s, they created the single most effective close combat weapon of the colonial period. The iron head was lighter than stone, took a sharper edge, and could be replaced without reknapping. Tribes from the Mohawk to the Chickasaw adopted the weapon within a generation. By the French and Indian War, tomahawks had become so feared that British officers issued standing orders for their troops to fire from cover and never close to melee range. In 1755, at the Battle of the Monongahela, native warriors using tomahawks killed nearly 500 British regulars in 30 minutes. The psychological effect was so severe that George Washington himself wrote to the governor of Virginia recommending that American militia be trained in tomahawk combat to match native skill. Number 8. The pipe tomahawk. Third, pattern break. This is where history gets strange. Colonial blacksmiths began forging tomahawks with hollow handles and bowls shaped into the top of the iron head, creating a weapon that doubled as a tobacco pipe. The pipe tomahawk became a symbol of diplomacy and warfare in a single object. Chiefs received them as gifts during treaty negotiations, and then carried them into battle against the men who had given them. George Washington owned at least 4. Meriwether Lewis carried one on the expedition west. The design made physical what the relationship between settler and tribe actually was, a tool for smoking peace that was also ready to kill. Pipe tomahawks made by colonial forges in Pennsylvania now sell at auction for over $100,000. They are perhaps the purest artifact of the American frontier, a weapon that understood its own contradictions better than the men who carried it. Number 7. The war hatchet, a shield breaker from the Great Lakes, was slightly different in design from tomahawks. It was heavier, with a wider cutting edge and often carried in pairs. Ojibwe and Menominee warriors in the Great Lakes region favored the war hatchet for shield breaking, using the heavy head to shatter wooden war shields and then finishing with a knife. The weapon required enormous upper body strength. Warriors trained from adolescence by splitting cedar logs, building the specific muscles needed to swing a war hatchet continuously for 10 minutes of combat. British officers during Pontiac's War in 1763 recorded Ojibwe warriors breaking through palisade walls with war hatchets in minutes, tearing apart 10-inch oak timbers. When the British finally abandoned Fort Michilimackinac, they reported that the wooden gates had been splintered beyond repair by a single afternoon of hatchet work. Technically forged in the early 1800s, the Bowie knife bridges the primitive and the modern. Jim Bowie's brother Resin had a blacksmith forge the original in 1827, and within 20 years, every frontiersman in America carried some version of it. The blade measured 9 to 15 inches, with a false edge on the back, a sharpened clip point, and a cross guard that protected the hand. It was designed for fighting, not for any utility purpose. The weapon became so popular that Alabama passed the Bowie Knife Act of 1837, taxing ownership at $100 per knife, an enormous sum intended to discourage the weapon entirely. Tennessee banned concealed carry, yet the knife spread anyway. Frontiersmen preferred it to pistols because it never misfired, never ran out of ammunition, and never failed in the rain. Through the Texas Revolution and into the Civil War, the Bowie knife was the personal weapon of the American frontier. Number 5. The pike and lance. In the 1600s, colonial militia still carried pikes, just as their ancestors had in European battles. A pike was a wooden shaft 12 to 16 feet long, tipped with a steel point, and used to repel cavalry charges. Massachusetts Bay Colony laws required every militia company to field 1 pikeman for every 5 musketeers until 1675. On the Great Plains, the lance served a similar function in native hands. Mounted Comanche and Kiowa warriors carried lances 10 feet long, tipped with iron or bone, used to run down buffalo and to unseat cavalry troopers. The lance demanded absolute control of the horse, riding at full gallop with only the knees for guidance while both hands managed the weapon. American soldiers who survived lance attacks described them as the most terrifying moment of any engagement. a silent, charging wall of steel arriving at 30 miles per hour. European colonists brought halberds to America in the 1600s, and the weapon remained in colonial militia service longer than it did in Europe. The halberd was a polearm about 6 to 7 feet long, with an axe blade, a spike, and a hook all mounted at the head. Officers carried halberds as symbols of rank into the 1700s, and sergeants' halberds saw actual combat use as late as the Revolutionary War. The weapon could hook a horseman from his saddle, puncture armor with the spike, or cleave a shield with the axe. American militia training manuals from the 1760s still included halberd drills, even as muskets dominated the infantry line. The halberd's decline matched the rise of the bayonet, which offered similar reach with a simpler weapon. By 1800, halberds had vanished from American arsenals entirely, surviving only in ceremonial use. Number 3, the crossbow. Fourth pattern break. Most Americans have no idea crossbows were used on this continent. Spanish conquistadors carried crossbows into Florida and the Southwest in the 1500s, using them alongside early matchlock muskets. The crossbow outranged the matchlock, fired silently, and did not require a lit match that gave away the shooter's position at night. In the Narvaez expedition of 1528, Spanish crossbowmen held off hundreds of Appalachian warriors, killing enemies at 200 yards with steel bolts that punched through wooden shields like paper. Native warriors studied the weapon and adopted variations of their own. The crossbow's decline came only when flintlock muskets became reliable enough to replace it. For nearly 200 years, a crossbow was more accurate, more silent, and more deadly than the firearms of the same era, which is exactly why American frontiersmen kept carrying them long after Europe abandoned them. Number 2, the flintlock musket. The flintlock was primitive by modern standards, but it transformed warfare in America. A trained soldier could load and fire 3 rounds per minute, sending a soft lead ball the size of a marble downrange at about 900 feet per second. The effective range was only 75 yards, and accuracy beyond 50 yards was essentially luck. But massed fire from a company of 80 muskets produced a wall of lead that no cavalry charge could survive. Colonial militia carried flintlocks through the French and Indian War, the Revolution, and into the War of 1812. The weapon demanded constant maintenance. Damp powder meant a misfire. A worn flint meant no spark. Yet for 200 years, the flintlock was the dominant weapon on American soil. Every major battle from Lexington to New Orleans was fought with it, and it changed the continent forever. Number 1, the bow and arrow. Above every other primitive weapon stands the bow. It fed the continent for 2,000 years before European contact. It defended villages, hunted buffalo, and killed bears at 30 yards. A skilled native archer could fire 12 aimed arrows in the time it took a colonial musketeer to load one shot. The bow made no sound, produced no smoke, required no powder, and never misfired. American history books understate its significance. Every major battle of the colonial period included bow fire. Native warriors continued to use bows effectively against American cavalry into the 1880s. At the Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876, Lakota and Cheyenne archers launched thousands of arrows over Custer's lines, killing and wounding dozens of troopers before the final charge. The bow was the weapon that built and defended this continent for 15,000 years, and it did not truly disappear until repeating rifles finally outpaced it in the late 19th century. Every American owes part of their national story to the quiet, deadly crack of a bowstring. So which one surprised you the most? The atlatl piercing Spanish steel? The obsidian blade sharper than a scalpel? The pipe Tomahawk in George Washington's personal collection? Drop your pick in the comments because I want to know which weapon you had no idea Americans used before firearms took over. Hit like if you learned something new today, and subscribe for more lost history that built this country. The weapons are gone, but the stories are not. See you on the next one.